She was only 6, barefoot in the snow, shaking under a brutal winter storm on the mountain road. When Ethan Walker, a former Navy SEAL, stopped his truck, Shadow, the German shepherd at his side, growled low, as if he already sensed the nightmare she'd escaped. Then the little girl looked up, her lips trembling, and whispered the words that froze Ethan where he stood. "He's going to kill Mommy." Those 6 words ignited a chase through a blizzard, a broken roof cabin, and a fight against a man who would rather spill blood than let his victims go. What happened next became a miracle carved from ice, courage, and a soldier who refused to turn away. Before we begin, share this story to spread hope, leave a comment, and subscribe for more powerful, true-inspired tales. The storm over Evergreen Pass. The winter storm pressed against the mountains like a living wall of ice. The sky above Evergreen Pass, a secluded Colorado town tucked between high ridges and frozen pines, had turned the color of old pewter. Snow hammered the winding mountain road in relentless sheets, swallowing sound and distance until even the nearest trees looked like faint silhouettes trapped behind frosted glass. Ethan Walker kept both hands tight on the steering wheel as his truck crawled along the empty highway. At 40, he carried the build of a man who had spent his life fighting things the world did not see. Broad shoulders filled out his navy winter coat, and his jaw, square, roughened by a day's growth of beard, tightened with each turn along the icy path. His dark brown hair, trimmed close, showed scattered strands of silver near the temples. Even in the dim cabin light, his eyes kept their grounded steadiness, the deep brown of earth beneath pine needles. There was always a quiet to Ethan, a stillness shaped by years as a Navy SEAL and the scars that came with it, some visible, others not. His left knee carried a stiffness from an old blast injury, leaving a slight hitch in his step on cold days like this. Those days also stirred old memories, moments he preferred to keep folded away. But life rarely asked permission before setting old ghosts loose. Beside him sat Shadow, his 5-year-old German shepherd. The dog's black and tan coat shimmered even under the weak glow of the dashboard. His posture was rigid, ears pricked, amber brown eyes scanning the storm-blurred world outside. Shadow had the disciplined stillness of a well-trained working dog, but beneath it was a protective instinct sharpened by countless hours of partnership. Ethan trusted Shadow's senses more than his own on nights like this. The truck crept around a curve, tires crunching over ice. Then Shadow made a sound, a low, rumbling growl that never came without reason. Ethan straightened, pulse tightening. "What is it, boy?" Shadow's body leaned forward, gaze fixed ahead. That was enough for Ethan. He eased the truck to the shoulder, the headlights slicing through a curtain of snow. At first, there was nothing but swirling white. Then something moved, a small shape, a fragile outline barely holding against the wind. Ethan's breath caught as a child stepped into view. She couldn't have been more than 6. Her long blonde hair clung in frozen strands to her cheeks. A torn dress hung from her thin shoulders, and her bare feet were mottled blue from the cold. Dark bruises marked her arms and collarbone. She hugged a crumpled piece of paper to her chest as though it were the only thing keeping her alive. Ethan's training surged to the surface. He shut off the engine, grabbed his coat, and stepped into the storm. The cold bit instantly. The wind clawed at him, but he forced his way toward the little girl. She staggered backward, like a startled fawn, but Shadow moved to block the wind from her, lowering himself into a protective stance, muscles tense but gentle in his presence. Ethan crouched slowly, mindful of how broken she looked. "Hey there," he said, voice low, steady. "My name's Ethan. Are you hurt?" Her lips trembled, but she didn't pull away. Her eyes, a startling, frightened blue, met his. "Chu ơi." She swallowed hard, words shaking between C's. "Chu giúp me chào voi, ông ấy bắt me, ông ấy đánh me, ông ấy nói sẽ giết me." The snowstorm pressed harder around them, as Ethan felt something inside his chest twist. It had been years since he'd faced the raw terror of a child. The feeling nearly took his breath. "What's your name?" he asked softly. She blinked away tears. "Lila Monroe." The name came out in a whisper, as if it were something she feared losing. Shadow stepped closer, positioning his sturdy frame between the girl and the storm. He didn't growl anymore. His instincts had shifted. This was someone to protect. Lila's small hand lifted, pointing toward the tree line swallowed in drifts of snow. "Na ka mai gay. Kui kan du, me kan oda." a broken roof house at the end of a forgotten road. Ethan followed her gesture to the dense forest, a maze of shadows where the storm howled the loudest. A house out there, in weather like this, meant trouble long before the child ever spoke. His stomach tightened. Someone had hurt her. Someone had her mother. Someone thought they wouldn't be found tonight. Ethan exhaled once, the breath a cloud before his face. The storm was rising. The temperature was dropping. And somewhere in that fury of snow and pines, a woman was bleeding, trapped and running out of time. He wrapped his coat around Lila's shoulders, lifting her carefully into his arms. "We're going to find her," he said, "but I need you to stay warm." Lila nodded weakly, clutching the paper in her hand as if it were the last piece of her world. Shadow trotted beside Ethan, eyes locked on the dark forest ahead. As Ethan carried Lila back to the truck, he paused once more, staring into the blinding storm. He didn't know if they would reach her mother in time, but he knew one thing. They had to try. Tracks in the snow, the storm thickened as Ethan settled Lila into the back seat of his truck, the heater humming weakly against the cold that seeped through every seam. Shadow climbed in beside her, the heavy weight of his body a silent promise of protection. Lila shivered under Ethan's winter coat, her small hands clutching the crumpled drawing as though it were a lifeline. Ethan glanced at her through the open door. "Lila, can you tell me anything else? Anything that helps me find your mom?" The little girl's lips trembled. Her blue eyes, still wide from terror, darted toward the dark forest beyond the snow-covered road. "He has a scar," she whispered. "From here." She traced a shaking finger from her cheek to her jaw. "He gets angry at night. He hurts Mommy when she screams." Her words tightened Ethan's chest. He'd heard voices like hers in refugee camps overseas, fear that didn't just tremble, but lived inside bone. He shut the door gently and circled around to the driver's seat. The storm howled, as if urging him to hurry. Shadow lifted his head, eyes locked on the woods. Ethan recognized that posture. The dog had switched from companion to tracker. "Okay, boy," he murmured. "Lead us." He drove only a short distance before the terrain grew too treacherous. Snow drifts swallowed half the road, and the wind pushed the truck sideways. Ethan pulled off near a line of fir trees, the engine idling in protest. He turned to Lila. "I need you to stay warm. Shadow and I are going to look. If you hear us call, answer, quietly, but answer. I'll come back for you no matter what." Lila nodded, her breath shaky. "Please find Mommy." Ethan squeezed her shoulder once, then stepped out into the blizzard with Shadow at his side. The forest swallowed them instantly. The wind screamed through the branches, whipping snow into sharp needles that stung Ethan's face. His boots sank deep with every step. The world narrowed to the beam of his flashlight and the rhythmic crunch of Shadow's movement ahead. Shadow lowered his nose to the ground. His breath puffed in white clouds as he picked up a scent, tail stiffening with focus. "Take it slow," Ethan said, though the dog hardly needed the reminder. They pushed deeper into the trees. The dark pressed closer, branches sagging heavily under the weight of ice. Somewhere far off, something creaked, maybe a tree bending, or maybe something less natural. The isolation gnawed at Ethan, stirring that old itch in his spine, the kind that had once warned him of ambushes and desert ruins. Then Shadow stopped. A low growl rumbled from his throat. Not fear, recognition. Ethan swept the flashlight ahead, and his breath froze. Tracks, but not footprints. Drag marks carved through the fresh snow, weaving between trees. Something, or someone, had been pulled across the ground. The snow around the marks was tinged with a dark, frozen crust. Blood. Ethan crouched beside the tracks, gloved fingers brushing the icy surface. Not old. The storm hadn't filled them in yet. Shadow stepped forward, ears pinned, gaze fixed ahead. The dog's body vibrated with the restrained readiness of a coiled spring. Ethan whispered, "Good boy. We've got her trail." He followed the drag marks, his flashlight jumping from tree to tree as the storm thickened. Each step tightened something in his chest. He could almost imagine Lila's mother, injured, terrified, fighting for breath. A branch snapped somewhere ahead. Ethan froze. Shadow stood rigid, nose lifted, tail straight. The wind shifted, carrying a scent. Sharp, metallic, unmistakable. More blood. And something else. Smoke. Ethan's breath hitched. Someone had been here recently, maybe still was. He signaled Shadow with 2 fingers, the old hand gesture from their training sessions. The dog moved quieter, low to the ground, a ghost sliding through snow. The drag marks veered left, toward a thicker cluster of pines. Ethan stepped carefully, every nerve alive. His heart thudded in time with the muffled roar of the storm. Then he saw it. Half buried under snow at the base of a collapsed pine lay a torn piece of fabric, dark blue, stiff with frozen blood. A woman's jacket sleeve, ripped clean at the seam. Ethan swallowed hard. She was fighting, he muttered, still fighting when he dragged her. Shadow sniffed the fabric, then snapped his head toward the northwest, letting out a short, urgent bark. Ethan nodded. We follow. They walked another 20 yards before the forest opened into a narrow clearing. The wind tore across it like a blade. At the far end stood a faint outline, just a shadowed smear against the white, barely visible through the storm. A structure, wooden, leaning, half hidden under snow. Ethan felt his muscles tighten. Is that the house? He whispered to himself. Before he could move closer, Shadow gave a sharp, alarming bark, one Ethan had only heard in moments of extreme danger. He froze. Something moved behind the house, a silhouette, dragging its weight unevenly, disappearing into the storm. Not just Lila's mother, someone else, someone big, with a limp that matched the drag marks. Ethan clenched his jaw. They were close, too close to turn back now. He placed a steady hand on Shadow's harness. Stay ready, buddy. They stepped forward into the clearing, the storm swallowing everything but their breath. They didn't know what waited inside that broken roof house, but they knew they were out of time. The broken roof cabin. The clearing stood silent except for the hiss of snow sliding off leaning pines. Ethan moved through it with careful, controlled steps, Shadow keeping low beside him. The cabin, barely upright beneath the weight of winter, emerged fully under his flashlight. Its roof sagged inward at the back, the boards warped from years of rain and neglect. One window was shattered, its jagged frame rattling with every gust. Weather-beaten planks lined the exterior, their paint long stolen by time and wind. Shadow let out a deep, rumbling growl and pressed forward, his paws breaking through the untouched snow at the threshold. Easy, Ethan whispered, though his own pulse had sharpened into something cold and decisive. He took one last look toward the trees, making sure Lila was hidden behind the large granite outcrop where he had left her. Her small figure, wrapped in his coat, crouched low with wide, frightened eyes. Ethan gave her a firm nod. Stay down, Lila. I'll bring her back. She clutched the coat tighter, but didn't speak. Ethan slipped inside the cabin. The stench hit first, stale rot, old liquor, and the metallic tang of dried blood. The beam of his flashlight cut across a room in chaos. A wooden chair lay overturned. Glass bottles, some broken, some simply abandoned, were strewn across the floor. The outline of rope impressions scarred the legs of the table, deep grooves that spoke of long nights and desperate struggles. Shadow moved ahead, nose twitching, shoulders tense. Ethan scanned the room. A scarf lay near the hearth, thin, floral-patterned, and stiff with fresh blood. It belonged to a woman, and recently so. The sight dug a sharp ache under his ribs. He barely had time to process it when a sound drifted from below, slow, dragging footsteps. Not the shuffling of someone uninjured, something heavier, more desperate. Ethan drew a steady breath. Basement, he murmured. Shadow's ears pricked at the same moment. The dog lowered himself to the ground, muscles coiling in readiness. Ethan followed the sound to a half-open door on the left side of the cabin. A steep set of wooden steps descended into darkness. Cold air seeped up from below, carrying the faint echo of ragged breaths and the scrape of something against concrete. He moved down one step at a time, Shadow just ahead. At the bottom, his flashlight caught movement. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, easily in his late 30s. His face was a map of hard lines and deep shadows, dominated by a jagged scar running from his left cheekbone down toward his jaw. His hair, dark, greasy, unkempt, hung in wet clumps against his forehead. His clothing was layered haphazardly, a torn flannel shirt under a heavy, unzipped jacket, both stained from dirt and old blood. His eyes were wild, fever-bright, eyes of a man who had lived too long on anger and paranoia. He dragged a woman through the basement, both hands locked under her arms as he pulled her toward a back exit. The woman, Sarah Monroe, as Ethan would later learn, was slender and pale, her long, dark brown hair tangled and matted to her cheeks. She wore a thin cotton blouse, soaked from sweat and blood, its sleeves ripped. Her face was drawn and hollow, with bruises blooming purple across her jaw and collarbone. Her breaths came in short, pained gasps, but her eyes, soft brown, gentle even in terror, still fought to stay open. Ethan felt heat rise under his sternum. Her wounds, the drag marks, the scarf, everything Lila had said was true. The scarred man jerked Sarah upright and pressed a knife to her throat when he noticed the flashlight. "Back up!" he roared, voice cracking. "I'll kill her! Don't make me do it!" Wind howled through the cabin above, the storm rattling the loose beams like bones. Snow whistled through the cracks in the back door behind him, open just a sliver, as if he'd tried to escape moments before. Ethan lifted his free hand slowly. "You don't want to do this. Put the knife down." The man's lip curled. "You think you can stop me? She's mine. She stays with me." Sarah whimpered, her knees buckling. "Please, don't, my daughter." Ethan's jaw tightened. Shadow shifted to the side, each movement deliberate, silent. The dog's gaze never left the man's knife hand. Ethan tried again, his voice low, calm in a way that came from years of training. "She's injured. She can't walk. You're not getting far in this storm." "I don't need far." The man spat the words, eyes flaring. He dragged her another inch. Sarah cried out softly, her strength nearly gone. She collapsed onto one knee, forcing the man to yank her upright again. His frustration blazed. Ethan saw it, the moment his attention broke, the knife hand dipping half an inch as he adjusted his grip. Shadow moved. The dog's paws were soundless on the concrete. He slid through the shadows left of Ethan, circling just beyond the man's peripheral vision. His body sank low, eyes locked on the man's wrist. Ethan kept talking to hold the man's gaze. "You let her go, and we walk out of here alive. You don't—" The man snapped, "Shut up!" His eyes flickered just once, towards Sarah, just long enough. That was all Shadow needed. With a blur of muscle and fur, the German Shepherd lunged out of the darkness, his jaws clamping around the man's forearm with surgical precision. The knife clattered to the floor as the man screamed, stumbling backward. Sarah sagged to the ground. Ethan surged forward, knocking the man off balance and pinning him against the damp basement wall. Shadow growled fiercely, but stepped back when Ethan issued a sharp command. The man fought, but he was no match for Ethan's strength or control. Within moments, Ethan had him subdued, breath heaving hard in the freezing basement air. Above them, the storm continued its violent song, snow pelting the cabin roof in waves. Sarah lay trembling on the floor, her eyes fluttering open weakly. She searched the shadows. "Lila," she whispered, voice breaking. "Where's my little girl?" Ethan softened, just a fraction. "She's safe. I found her in the woods. She held on long enough for us to get to you." Tears blurred her vision. You saved her." Ethan shook his head. "She saved herself, and she brought us here." He lifted her carefully, shielding her from the cold air as much as he could. Shadow stood close, watching her with soft eyes, his previous ferocity melting into gentleness. They weren't out of danger yet, but Sarah was alive, and that was enough to keep moving. The standoff in the blizzard, the back door of the cabin slammed open with a violent crack, the wind instantly flooding the basement with icy air. The scarred man hauled Sarah Monroe up the splintered steps, his fingers digging cruelly into her arms. Snow spiraled into the stairwell, swirling around them like ghosts rising from the floorboards. Sarah stumbled onto the porch, her thin frame nearly collapsing beneath the force of the storm. She was trembling, her long, dark hair whipping chaotically across her bruised face, her breath coming out in fast, frightened clouds. The man dragged her toward an old pickup parked at an angle, its headlights flickering through the sheets of snow. The vehicle itself looked as worn and unpredictable as its owner, rust creeping across the bumper, one headlight cracked, tires half buried by drifting snow. The engine coughed and sputtered, barely holding on as if even the truck understood the madness it was being asked to serve. "Move!" the man snarled, jerking Sarah forward. She winced, her bare feet sinking into the freezing powder. Her pale skin had taken on a bluish tone, and her knees buckled under her. Still, she pushed against him with what little strength she had left, her voice breaking. "Please, stop. You don't have to." "Shut up." He yanked her harder, rage distorting his already harsh features. Up close, the scar that carved his cheek into a permanent sneer looked more menacing than ever. His eyes were bloodshot, filled with the wildness of a man cornered by his own violence. The storm roared around them, wind slashing sideways. And then, a quiet, steady voice cut through the chaos. "Let her go." The scarred man spun around. Ethan Walker stood in the middle of the snow-covered yurt, framed by the white fury of the blizzard. The storm clung to his winter coat and beard, outlining him in ice. He stood tall despite the biting wind, his posture grounded by years of discipline. There was no shouting, no posturing, only a resolve forged long before this night. The man laughed, a sharp, manic sound that didn't match the trembling underneath. "Look at you, a hero with no backup. You think you can take me, Navy boy? In this storm?" Ethan didn't flinch. "I'm not alone." The scarred man's eyes narrowed. "What?" A shadow moved behind him, silent, precise. Shadow, the German shepherd, had circled around the cabin, emerging from behind the pickup like a phantom carved out of the storm. Snow clung to his black and tan coat, his body low, muscles poised, his amber eyes fixed on the man's knife hand. The scarred man jerked Sarah closer, raising the blade. "Take one more step, and—" He didn't finish. The man made the fatal mistake of glancing toward Ethan. In that heartbeat, Shadow lunged. The dog burst through the snow with startling speed, his movement a blur of power and instinct. His jaws locked around the man's forearm, the one holding the knife. With exact precision learned from years of training, the impact drove the man backward, his scream slicing through the storm as the knife flew from his grip, disappearing into the drifts. Sarah fell to her knees, freed, and Ethan moved. He closed the distance in seconds, tackling the man into the snow. The impact sent a spray of white into the air. They grappled violently, fists plunging into powder, boots scraping against ice. Ethan's knee flared with old pain, but he pushed through it, leveraging his weight and training. The man swung wildly, hitting Ethan's shoulder. "You think she'll thank you?" he snarled. "They always come back, they always—" "Not this time." Ethan rolled, pinning him face down. Shadow stood inches away, baring his teeth in a silent warning. The man froze, finally understanding the reality he had refused to see. Within seconds, Ethan had him cuffed, his breath steaming in heavy bursts. The storm raged around them, but the danger, at least the immediate danger, was done. Ethan rose slowly, wincing as the cold bit into his hands. Snow was already gathering on his shoulders and in the deep lines of his face. Shadow, breath fogging, pressed close for warmth. Then Ethan heard it, a soft, broken sound behind him. Sarah Monroe sat slumped near the cabin door, her thin arms wrapped around herself. Her eyes searched desperately through the white haze. "Lila," she whispered, voice barely reaching him. "Where's my little girl?" Ethan stepped toward her, his voice gentle despite the adrenaline still burning in his veins. "She's safe, Sarah. She's waiting for you." Before Sarah could respond, tiny footsteps pattered through the snow. "Mommy!" Lila burst from behind the granite rock where Ethan had hidden her, stumbling forward with her arms outstretched. Her blonde hair was tangled, her cheeks flushed with cold, but her eyes, wide and full of hope, were fixed only on her mother. Sarah let out a choked sob and embraced her daughter, pulling her close with trembling hands. Lila clung to her, burying her face in her mother's shoulder. The world around them blurred into wind and white, but their warmth filled the space between them. Ethan turned away, quietly giving them the moment, not because he was uncomfortable, but because he knew what reunions like this meant. He had seen too many torn apart to ever take one for granted. Shadow pressed against his leg, tail lowering in a calm, contented sweep. Ethan rested a hand on the dog's head. "We did good, boy." The last light of the storm dawn crept slowly over Evergreen Pass, a pale, exhausted blue light filtering through the thinning storm. Snow blanketed the clearing, smoothing every jagged shape into something soft and deceptively calm. The worst of the blizzard had passed, leaving the world stunned and silent in its wake. The sound of engines broke that silence. 2 patrol trucks pushed through the drifts, their red and blue lights muted under the gray sky. The first to step out was Deputy Mark Ellison, a man in his late 40s with a sturdy build, shaped by years on mountain roads. His round, wind-chapped face and sandy mustache gave him the look of someone dependable, though his eyes carried a permanent tiredness from long shifts and too many domestic calls gone wrong. He adjusted his thick winter jacket and trudged toward Ethan, boots sinking ankle-deep with each step. "Walker," Ellison called over the wind. "Dispatch said you had a live one." Ethan nodded once, his breath clouding. Snow clung to his navy coat, turning him into a figure carved out of winter itself. "He's inside, cuffed. Injuries on the woman are serious, frostbite, bruising. She needs warmth and fluids." The second patrol truck door slammed. Out stepped Officer Renee Porter, a young woman in her late 20s with sharp cheekbones, warm brown skin, and tightly braided black hair that glimmered with frost. She moved with crisp efficiency, scanning the area with quick, assessing eyes. She was known in the county for her calm under pressure, a trait she'd developed after losing her younger brother to a mountain accident years before. Since then, she had carried an unspoken vow to protect whoever she could. Porter approached Sarah Monroe, who was wrapped in a blanket near the cabin steps. Sarah looked small and fragile, her long brown hair tangled, her lips split from cold, bruises blossoming across her jaw. Yet her eyes were steady now, clearer as she held Lila close. "We'll take care of you," Porter said gently, kneeling to check Sarah's pulse and frostbite. "You're safe now." Sarah nodded weakly, emotion tightening her throat. "Thank you. Thank all of you." Behind her, Lila clutched Ethan's long winter coat around her small frame. She leaned into his side as if it were the only place still warm in the world. Shadow lay pressed against her legs, his thick black and tan fur forming a barrier between her and the snow. The German shepherd kept his amber eyes fixed on everyone moving nearby, watching, guarding, judging who was friend and who was not. When the scarred man was dragged from the cabin by Ellison and another officer, he snarled like a cornered animal. His wrists were bound tight behind him, his scar pale against his reddened face. Snowflakes clung to his greasy hair as he thrashed once, twice, before realizing resistance only deepened his humiliation. "You shouldn't have interfered," he spat toward Ethan, voice cracking. "She was mine." Ethan didn't react. His jaw tightened, nothing more. Ellison shoved the man toward the patrol truck. "Save it for the judge." The man glared over his shoulder, eyes burning with fury, but he couldn't escape the truth standing before him. Ethan Walker, steadier than the storm, and Shadow, whose low warning rumble followed him like a shadow of judgment. Lila watched the man disappear into the truck, her breath hitching. Ethan knelt and touched her shoulder lightly. "He won't come near you again." Her small nod was enough. By mid-morning, rescue crews had arrived to transport Sarah and Lila to the hospital in town. Before being lifted into the vehicle, Sarah reached for Ethan's hand with trembling fingers. "I'm alive. Because of you," she whispered. "I don't know how to thank you." Ethan shook his head. "I only did what anyone should." But Sarah's eyes told him she knew better. Not anyone would have followed a child into a blizzard. Not anyone would have charged into a collapsing cabin, or held their ground against a man willing to kill. She squeezed his hand once more, before being guided into the ambulance. Lila was last to climb in. She paused at the door, turning back. "Will I see you again?" she asked, voice small but hopeful. Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it. He'd spent years keeping distance between himself and the world. It was safer that way, for him, for others. But Shadow nudged his leg, as if reminding him of the warmth he had felt watching mother and child reunite. "Yes," Ethan said quietly, "you will." Lila smiled, a small glowing thing in the cold morning air. 3 days later, the storm had melted into clear skies. Sunlight glimmered on rooftops, and icicles hung along porches like glass ornaments. In the stillness of that calm, someone knocked on Ethan's cabin door. Lila stood there, bundled in a lavender coat too big for her, cheeks rosy from the crisp air. In her mittened hand was a drawing. She held it out to him shyly. "I made this for you." The picture was vibrant with crayon color, a tall man with a square jaw and a trim beard, a German shepherd with intelligent amber eyes, a woman with long brown hair holding a little girl, all standing beneath a sky clearing after a storm. Ethan stared at it longer than he expected. Shadow stepped beside him, tilting his head as if inspecting the artwork himself. His tail swept low, slow, warm. Lila's voice was soft, but full of certainty. "This is a family, because you brought Mommy back to me." For a moment, Ethan couldn't speak. Something inside him, something old and hardened, shifted in the quiet. He knelt, brushing a thumb gently across the corner of the page. "It's beautiful," he said. "Thank you." Shadow nudged Lila's shoulder, earning a giggle, and as snow continued melting under the early spring sun, Ethan felt the distant weight of his past grow just a little lighter. Evergreen Pass, battered by a brutal winter, carried a new warmth now. A soldier. A dug. A mother and child saved in the moment they needed someone most. Some storms took. This one had given something back. Some miracles do not arrive with thunder or lightning. They don't come wrapped in grand signs or shining wonders. Sometimes God sends miracles in the simplest forms. A soldier who stops his truck in the middle of a storm, a loyal dog who knows exactly when to bark, a little girl brave enough to run toward the light instead of the dark. And if we pay attention, these quiet miracles still happen every day. When a stranger chooses kindness instead of looking away. When someone steps forward at the very moment another person needs saving. When a small act is done at the right time, to the right soul. If you believe God watches over the vulnerable, if you believe He places the right people in the right moment, and if this story touched your heart, leave a comment. Even a simple amen can warm a cold day. Share this story to spread hope, and subscribe to the channel so we can continue bringing you stories of healing, stories where kindness wins, stories shaped by the gentle hands of God Himself. May God bless every viewer watching today, granting peace in your heart, strength in your trials, and a well-timed miracle for you or for someone you love.